إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدًا عبده ورسوله يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما أما بعد فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. فيا عباد الله, from amongst the affairs that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded us with and informed us of, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has informed us of, is regarding the virtues of patience. As-sabr. Patience is one of the virtues of this religion. Patience is one of the virtues of Al-Islam. Indeed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned to us in the Quran that salvation is through patience. When Allah said, وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. That indeed mankind is in loss, except for those who have iman and do righteous deeds, and they enjoin the truth. They call one another to the truth and also to patience. And the scholars, they mention iman and actions and da'wah. All of these affairs can only be done upon patience. A person who does not have patience will not learn about his religion, he will give up. A person who does not have patience will not remain firm upon the obedience to Allah. A person who does not have patience will not stay away from the haram. A person who does not have patience will not be satisfied with the decree of Allah. And that's why patience is in three affairs. As-sabru ala ta'atillah. Patience upon the obedience and worship to Allah. Was-sabru an maharimillah. Patience staying away from the prohibitions and what Allah has made haram. Was-sabru ala aqdarillahi al-mu'limah. And patience upon the difficulties of the decree that may occur. And that is why it is mentioned in many places in the Quran and the Sunnah, the virtues of patience. Allah mentioned in the Quran in Surah Al-Anfal, وَاصْبِرُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ مَعَ الصَّابِرِينَ. Be patient. Indeed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with the patient ones. Inna Allah ma'a sabirin. Allah is with those who demonstrate sabr. They demonstrate patience upon whatever their circumstances may be. Similarly, in Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala informed us, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِّنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ الَّذِينَ إِذَا أَصَابَتْهُم مُّصِيبَةٌ قَالُوا إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ أُولَئِكَ عَلَيْهِمْ صَلَوَاتٌ مِّن رَّبِّهِمْ وَرَحْمَةٌ وَأُولَئِكَ هُمُ الْمُهْتَدُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala informed us here that indeed we are going to test you. We are going to test you in different affairs. Test you with a matter of fear, or with hunger, or with a loss of wealth, or yourselves, or your provisions, and give glad tidings to the patient ones. وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ. Give glad tidings to the patient ones. When Allah tests His servants, and certainly we are tested. Certainly in this life we will be tested. And that is why Allah mentioned also in the Quran, تِلْكَ الْأَيَّامِ نُدَاوِلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. Those are the days that we alternate between the people. You will have days of happiness and joy, and you will have days of sadness and grief. These are the days that come upon a person during his life, days of happiness and days of sadness. That is why Allah mentioned تِلْكَ الْأَيَّامُ نُدَاوِلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. They are the days that we change around between the people. So a person needs to remain patient during his life, especially at the times of difficulty. When difficulty occurs, then it is the sign of a believer that he remains patient during those times of difficulty. As for a person who does not demonstrate any patience, then that individual is going against the guidance of the Quran and the Sunnah. In one narration, the Prophet ﷺ said, أَنَا بَرِيءٌ مِّنَ الصَّالِقَةِ وَالْحَالِقَةِ وَالشَّاقَّةِ. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned that he is innocent of الصَّالِقَةِ وَهِيَ الَّتِي تَرْفَعُ صَوْتَهَا عِنْدَ الْمُصِيبَةِ. That is a woman, a person who raises her voice, screaming and shouting when something difficult happens, and shows no patience. وَالْحَالِقَةِ الَّتِي تَحْلُقُ شَعْرَهَا عِنْدَ الْمُصِيبَةِ. The one who shaves her head off at the time of difficulty. And الشَّاقَّةِ تَشُقُّ ثَوْبَهَا عِنْدَ الْمُصِيبَةِ. The one who tears her clothes and rips the pockets, screaming and shouting when something difficult occurs. So the Prophet ﷺ warned us against those characteristics. In another hadith, لَيْسَ مِنَّا, the Prophet ﷺ said, لَيْسَ مِنَّا مَنْ ضَرَبَ الْخُدُودَ وَشَقَّ الْجُيُوبَ وَدَعَا بِدَعْوَ الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ. Not from amongst us is the one who beats himself and tears his clothes and screams and shouts with the words of Jahiliyyah like they used to. When something difficult happens, when somebody dies, when some other difficulty in the decree overcomes you, the Prophet ﷺ said, not from us is the person who does these things. And what is the meaning, لَيْسَ مِنَّا? Meaning this sin is from the kaba'ir. When the Prophet ﷺ says in a hadith, لَيْسَ مِنَّا مَنْ فَعَلَ كَذَا وَكَذَا, that not from us is the one who does this or that, it means those sins are from the kaba'ir. They are from the major sins. So this lack of patience at the time of difficulty is from amongst the major sins. Screaming and shouting and losing all your patience and saying evil things or saying words from the words of Jahiliyyah. Why me, and why did it happen, and why to me? All of these things that the people they do, screaming and shouting and pulling their hair and tearing their clothes. These are not from the characteristics of the Muslims. A Muslim who knows that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala controls everything. A Muslim who knows that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed all of this decree, the qadr, 50,000 years before the creation of the heavens and the earth. كتب الله مقادير الخلائق قبل أن يخلق السماوات والأرض ب50,000 سنة. All of this decree was written 50,000 years before the creation of the heavens and the earth. A believer who knows all of these things, he knows everything is by the will of Allah. Everything is by the mashi'ah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we will have tests and trials in this world. Then that type of believer will know that he needs to remain patient. He will know that Allah is testing you, and he will know that he needs to remain patient during that time of test. فالصابر هو الذي يكف جوارحه عما لا ينبغي ويكف لسانه عما لا ينبغي. The one who is patient is the one who controls his limbs from doing things that show a lack of patience. And the one who is patient is the one who controls his tongue and does not say things which show that he has no patience. Instead, he thanks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and he fills his heart with iman, and he does not fall into depression and sadness and grief and losing his patience. Whatever the test may be, maybe the test is a test of your wealth and you are in poverty. Maybe the test is a test in your health and you are in sickness. The tests can be of different types. And so the Prophet ﷺ gave us a great encouragement in the hadith when he said, عَجَبًا لِأَمْرِ الْمُؤْمِنِ إِنَّ أَمْرَهُ كُلَّهُ لَهُ خَيْرٌ. Amazing is the affair of a believer. All of his circumstances are good for him. وَلَيْسَ ذَلِكَ لِأَحَدٍ إِلَّا لِلْمُؤْمِنِ. And that circumstance is for nobody else except a believer. For the believer, all of his circumstances, everything in his life is good for him. Only for the believers. How? إِنْ أَصَابَتْهُ ضَرَّاء صَبَرَ فَكَانَ خَيْرًا لَهُ وَإِنْ أَصَابَتْهُ سَرَّاء شَكَرَ فَكَانَ خَيْرًا لَهُ. That when some difficulty overcomes him, when some difficulty overcomes a believer, he remains patient and he shows sabr. And so that is goodness for him and that is good deeds for him, that he remains patient at the time of difficulty. But if something good happens to him, then in that circumstance, shakara فَكَانَ خَيْرًا لَهُ. He thanks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that goodness in his life, and that is goodness for him too then. So even if it is something difficult, or even if it is something good happening to him, both circumstances are good for the believer. In the times of difficulty, he remains patient and is rewarded. In the times of happiness and goodness, he thanks Allah and is rewarded. So the believer, his circumstance is good in all of the situations. And this is how a believer should think and should remember, that no matter what the circumstance may be, no matter what the situation may be, that the person must remember to maintain his trust and dependence and patience in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in all circumstances, good or difficult. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. فيا عباد الله, we have spoken about the virtue of patience, and we have spoken about the need for a person to remain patient upon his circumstances. And in this regard, the scholars have given further advice, and they have said that an individual, when he remains patient, يحتسب ويصبر ويعلم أن ذلك من عند الله فيحتسب ذلك ويكف جوارحه عما لا ينبغي. When something difficult happens, a person remains patient and seeks his reward from Allah, knowing that these difficulties will be a means of goodness for him, maybe a sickness, a means of removing his evil deeds and his sins, a means of raising his level through his patience. So a believer seeks his reward with Allah. وَإِنْ رَضِيَ بِهَذَا وَاطْمَأَنَّ إِلَيْهِ وَرَضِيَ بِمَا قَدَّرَ اللَّهُ لَهُ كَانَ أَعْظَمُ وَأَكْبَرُ وَأَفْضَلُ. But if a person, not only is he patient, but more than that, he is actually satisfied and content. Satisfied and content. رَضِيَ بِمَا قَدَّرَ اللَّهُ لَهُ. Satisfied and content with what Allah has decreed for him, then that is even greater. Because somebody may just be patient, but another person is patient and also happy and satisfied and content with what Allah has decreed for him and comfortable with what Allah has decreed for him. That person is even higher in the level. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّ عِظَمَ الْجَزَاءِ مَعَ عِظَمِ الْبَلَاءِ. That the greatness of reward, it comes with the greatness of the trial. The greater the difficulty, and so the more patience you show, then the greater your reward will be. The more difficult the situation is, and you demonstrate your patience and your gratitude and your satisfaction, then you will have a greater reward. وَإِنَّ اللَّهِ إِذَا أَحَبَّ قَوْمًا ابْتَلَاهُمْ. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves a people, He tests them. فَمَنْ رَضِيَ فَلَهُ الرِّضَى. So whomsoever is satisfied and content and happy with that and patient, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be pleased with him. وَمَنْ سَخَطَ فَلَهُ سَخَطْ. But whomsoever is displeased with that and does not show patience, then Allah will be displeased with him. فَالصَّبْرُ وَاجِبٌ وَالرِّضَى سُنَّ مُؤَكَّدَةٌ. So to be patient, that's obligatory. Must be patient in these times of difficulty. To go above that and to have the rida, to be content and pleased with your circumstance and to be grateful and to have that higher level of patience, that is a higher level to aim for. That is a higher level to try and achieve. But the minimum is that everybody remains patient in times of trials and in times of difficulties. وَهُنَاكَ مَرْتَبَةٌ أُخْرَى. And there is in fact another level too. There is another level when it comes to difficulties and about patience. وَهِيَ اعْتِبَارُ الْمُصِيبَةِ نِعْمَةً. That a person considers a difficulty to actually be a blessing. يشكر الله عليها فيكون شاكرا صابرا راضيا. So a person thanks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon that difficulty which he considers a blessing for him. So he thanks Allah and he's patient and he is pleased and content, all of it together. يرى أن المصيبة نعمة. He considers that this difficulty is a blessing for him. هذا المرض الذي أصابه أو فقر أو خسارة في صلعة أو ما أشبه ذلك يراها نعمة يشكر الله عليها لما يترتب عليها من تكفير السيئات وحط الخطايا. Because a person knows that through this difficulty it will be a means of the takfir al-sayyi'at, that his sins will be expiated, his sins and his wrongs will be removed and expiated through this trial if he remains patient. So he considers the trial to be a ni'mah for him, an opportunity for him to have his sins expiated, an opportunity for him to have his wrongs taken away from him through showing patience at that time of difficulty, at that time of hardship. And if you examine the stories of the prophets, the Qasas al-Anbiya, you see how much patience the prophets and messengers they had with all of the difficulties from the kuffar and the mushrikun and what they did to them. How much patience Musa alayhi salam had with Pharaoh and Pharaoh attacking him, and how much patience Ibrahim alayhi salam had with all of the mushrikun at that time wanting to burn him and everything. How much patience the prophets and messengers had in calling to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in knowing that all of this life, this decree, it is a test upon us to see which of us will be the best in our actions. الذي خلق الموت والحياة ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن عملا. Allah is the one who created death and life to test you. Which of you will be the best in your actions, will be the best in your deeds? So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us all from the patient believers, those who remain patient in times of difficulty, and thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in times of ease. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad. Aqim as-salah.